and be seated. Okay. Good morning. I'm Atam Dhawan, Senior Vice Provost for Research here at NJIT, and I take this opportunity to welcome you all to join us, National Academy of Inventors chapter at NJIT, workshop on Sustainable Societies Global Healthcare. This is the second workshop on the Sustainable Societies Quest for Innovative Solutions that is presented to you and brought to you by the National Academy of Inventors chapter at NJIT. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Joel Bloom, the president of the NJIT, for his welcome remarks. Dr. Bloom.
Thank you, Atam, and good morning to all. Well, you the National Academy. It's a pleasure to host this workshop in conjunction with NJIT Centers and Labs Showcase, which features more than 140 specialized collaborative research units representing NJIT's enterprise of basic, applied, and translational research. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank the driving forces behind today's program. Atam Dhawan, our Senior Vice Provost for Research and Executive Director of Undergraduate Research and Innovation. He is also a distinguished professor of electrical and computer engineering here at NJIT. I'd also like to acknowledge Fadi Deek, our Provost and Senior Executive Vice President. Both Fadi and Atam have been instrumental in us becoming a National Academy of Inventors chapter. We are most pleased to have inaugurated this chapter at NJIT. This is our first year because of the spirit and the innovation which drives much of NJIT and has been a catalyst for our research for well over a decade, which has also brought us and earned us the NJIT R1 status in Carnegie classification. Today's workshop on global healthcare is part of NJIT's chapters workshop series on innovation to global solutions. The first workshop in the series took place in November and was focused on sustainable environment, climate change. And next we'll cover data revolution and next generation cyber infrastructure. Healthcare innovation is a strategic topic for NJIT and one of the three high impact research challenges for our university, along with sustainable societies and next generation computing and cyber infrastructure. Our goal is to bring together key stakeholders with an eye toward developing an integrated approach that focuses on education, research, innovation, and technology translation, specifically point-of-care technology in under-resourced environments. Today, you will learn about innovative, technology-driven global solutions for addressing the healthcare grand challenge through preventive, personalized, and precision medicine. Our keynote speaker is Dr. Roderick Pettigrew. Roderick is the Chief Executive Officer of Engineering and Health and Executive Dean, Intercollegiate School of Engineering and Medicine at Texas A&M University. Dr. Pettigrew is the former founding director of the National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering. He is a member of all three national academies on science, engineering, and medicine, and is a fellow of the National Academy of Inventors. We're also joined by several distinguished guests, including panel moderators, Dr. Arunan Sir-Ann Arjan, who is a White House Presidential Innovation Fellow with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, and Dr. Reynold Panettiere, Doctor of New Jersey Alliance for Clinical and Translational Science, as well as Vice Chancellor for Translational Medicine at Science at Rutgers University. So once again, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all and wish you a highly productive workshop. Thank you and take care. And thank you, Atum.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bloom. This is my great pleasure to outline the workshop agenda at this particular point. Today, we are talking about the global healthcare. As I mentioned, that this is a workshop series in 3 parts. The first one we had on November 15th on sustainable societies, climate change. Today, we are talking about the global healthcare, and the third will be featured in a few months on the data revolution and the next generation cyber infrastructure. These 3 have been chosen as the strategic research challenges area for New Jersey Institute of Technology as our research enterprise grows further with over 140 research institutes, centers, and specialized laboratories with our faculty, research staff, and students. Today's event is also aligned with the NJIT Research Enterprise Showcase featuring our major research institutes, centers, and a specialized lab. One of the things that when we started working on the NJIT research challenges to be aligned with the global challenges, as well as the federal agencies, the trends, scientific and translational, science, engineering, and medicine trends, we talked about that the global drivers, specifically in these 3 research challenges areas, are driven by the infrastructure enablers. And these enablers are shown on this particular slide with respect to the technology-based innovations and research, resources and infrastructure, and also the governance and the policies. A very good example of intersection of these infrastructure enablers to global healthcare is what we have recently seen, and we are still going through the COVID-19 pandemic. We have seen the mRNA technologies that the research and the innovation has driven us to a solution to get back to normal from this particular pandemic in terms of the mRNA vaccines. But the research and the technology innovation could not solve this particular problem alone. We needed the infrastructure support. We needed that particular large-scale manufacturing. We needed the large-scale manufacturing of the testing or the point-of-care testing. And we needed an infrastructure to get those vaccines and point-of-care tests delivered to the patients. And we have seen the tremendous role that this infrastructure has played over the last 2 years. But this could not have been possible without having the governance and the proper policies that we have seen from the lockdown phases to the relaxation. Today, still, we are governed by the policies of masking when we have the large events indoor, but also looking into the discussions and the compliance to the vaccine and the boosters mandate. Now, the infrastructure enablers can only be happening and making its fullest impact with respect to the growth catalyst. And those growth catalysts are communication, education, and the equity to deal with the socio-economic disparities. And again, going back to the global healthcare pandemic challenge, with respect to the vaccine and the masking mandates, we see that a lot of significant role has been played by the communication, by finding out how we can educate the populations and the society what vaccine and the therapeutic agents can offer and what they cannot offer. It also requires an understanding of how a particular healthcare challenge is impacting the socioeconomically challenged societies, particularly those who do not have access or who are epidemiologically or physiologically in a different group than the normal population. And often they are correlated with the socioeconomic status, the way these communities struggle in their own way into the economic pathways, physiologically challenged, or having a background conditions associated with it. So the question comes over here that when you look into the healthcare, global healthcare challenges, how they go around the world and how do they impact different parts of the world with different type of physiological and pathological conditions. We know that the last 2 years we have been completely consumed by the infectious diseases and the pandemic because that was what was impacting and disrupting our lives so significantly. However, there is a whole list of the non-communicable diseases that lead to the 10 top causes of the deaths around the world. We shouldn't be forgetting about those. We shouldn't be forgetting that they are also impacted by the socioeconomic status in developing nations as well as in the developed economies. And we can see from these WHO studies that the top causes of death from the sectors that are associated with high income, moderate income, or the low income groups vary very significantly. And if we look into the areas where they are socioeconomically challenged, even in the developed countries versus the developing countries, we will see the trend of those challenges pose a very different scenario and the different demand for the different types of the solution to provide help. So in terms of these challenges, whether they are in communicable diseases or they are non-communicable diseases, it is very important to keep in mind the contextual information about the environment in which the healthcare is provided by various sectors, from the government-managed healthcare protocols in some countries versus privately managed healthcare versus the cost associated with the local providers. But one thing of sure is a global challenge is everywhere the cost of the quality healthcare is rising across the globe. The other part is where there are under-resourced environment. And this is not just about the developing nations that they don't have access to the quality healthcare facilities nearby. It is also applicable to the areas, rural areas in the developed nations. And we know that even in United States, there are the areas where the COVID vaccine or other healthcare facilities are not just available next door. And we have gone through those challenges recently. This is the good news on one side is that as the technology and innovation has impacted the practice of medicine, the life expectancy has increased all over the globe. But it also poses a different kind of challenge, that our society is aging. We have more senior populations in every country than we used to have 50 years ago or 100 years ago. So aging population comes with the different kind of challenges. And many of the diseases that epidemiologically we have been seeing were actually peaking at the later age group or the senior age group are now being seen at the younger age. We are talking about many of the critical diseases such as glioblastoma or skin cancers or even colon cancers. They are getting at the younger age disrupting our lives than they used to earlier in the history. So, and also the brain-related degenerative diseases, response-related diseases. These are impacting the quality of the life, and that is also the issue related to how the society deals with the senior population. In some of the countries, the assisted living is provided in a very different way and a different way to deal and manage the healthcare issues. And then you have those critical diseases that we still need to find the advanced medicine based solutions, which we will talk a little bit later today, along with all kind of new challenges, which are trauma or the fast breakthrough that may be the man-made disasters or the natural disasters, as we are talking about the climate change, hurricanes and disasters coming our way in a very different way than they used to happen some time ago. And those require a very different way to manage the public health emergencies. And we have seen some of those recently. So when you look into the evolution of the innovation in the practice of medicine, you can see that in the past, we have evolved with the practice of medicine in terms of signs and symptoms and some, the test associated with it. And today, we rely a lot on the clinical trials. And the people like the COVID-19 vaccine, they are still debating about the clinical trials on which they can be convinced or they cannot be convinced about the efficacy of the mRNA vaccine. And we have, seen and we are living through those situations. But what the future where this is going into the personalized, preventive, and precision medicine, the 3 Ps that sometime back Dr. Francis Collin and Dr. Roderick Pettigrew, as the respective director of the NIH and the National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering, started with that particular initiative of combining the personalized and preventive medicine to the precision medicine. And I had the honor of working with both of these leaders, and specifically with Dr. Pettigrew for 12 years ago. We started together under his leadership the International Conference of Healthcare Innovations and Point-of-Care Technologies. And the first one was in Bangalore and then Seattle, and then Cancun, and then at the NIH in Bethesda, where we linked and studied the correlation of how the advanced medicine, of the precision medicine, can be complemented with the personalized medicine in a preventive way by adapting the point-of-care technologies for the continuous monitoring of high-risk patients. And we saw that particular part of the futuristic innovation come into action in the last 2 years, where telemedicine and the point-of-care testing technologies for COVID just helped us to move forward managing this unprecedented challenge. Where we are going, perhaps we are going toward engineering the customized and personalized therapeutic medication for the patient, which are basically driven by the data analytics. So when we look into the mRNA technologies and we say, can we customize the immunotherapeutic response by looking into the mRNA technology and customizing to the specific group of the people or the specific individual, because everybody's physiological responses, they may be grouped for the sake of cost-benefit analysis in the practice of the medicine, but it should be noted and it should be debated that everybody's physiological response, particularly the immune response, may be different based on the physiological and the pathological conditions, as well as the genomic response or cell and gene therapy that is coming in play in order to seek for a personalized solution with respect to the precision medicine. There is another P that Dr. Pettigrew is going to be bringing later, and I don't want to take the thunder away from there. So at this particular point, I will keep my remarks on the point-of-care technologies as a part of this paradigm of the future practice of medicine, and that is, how do we do further the point-of-care technology development and commercialization with respect to educating and communicating and reaching out specifically to the socioeconomically challenged communities to convince them through the infrastructure to use those preventive medicine measures using the technology for continuous monitoring, so that the critical illnesses can be diagnosed early in the process and then can be customized with engineering medicine for the customized and personalized therapeutic response. But it will require the patient acceptance, physician acceptance, and the provider acceptance, keeping in mind that the privacy, integrity, and the security has to be intact. So this is something that we started 12 years ago with, and now being continued with Dr. Stephen Schechter and his coordinating center at Summit, who would be a panelist and is speaking to you in a few minutes, but also under the leadership of Dr. Tiffany Lash, who is coordinating the point-of-care research network, to which I have the pleasure of serving the chair of the Independent Expert Advisory Board. So at this particular point, I would like to introduce our distinguished keynote speaker. You have already heard a little bit about Dr. Pettigrew by Dr. Bloom. Before I go and say a few more words about Dr. Pettigrew, I just wanted to check with my media services people. Dan, is Dr. Pettigrew's presentation is okay? No. Huh?
He's going to share his screen.
Okay, all right. So we are very blessed today, and I'm so grateful to Dr. Roderick Pettigrew that he took the time from his busy schedule to join us and share his thoughts with us as the distinguished keynote address. Dr. Pettigrew is pioneer in many, many areas, from healthcare innovation, from the technologies in the cardiovascular area, but also, as you know, that he is the founder of the National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering that has played a tremendous role in engineering protocols for the practice of the medicine, and particularly the point of care technologies, but in general, the imaging instrumentation and bioengineering area. He's also a pioneer in the education area, and is in his current position, he is creating a very innovative programs, educational programs at the intersection of engineering and medicine. Dr. Pettigrew has brought many pioneering initiatives through the NIH system in the area of the personalized, preventive, and precision medicine. And I'm so grateful that I am here and in this particular time period that I had the honor and the privilege of working with him and his team. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Roderick Pettigrew.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, New Jersey Institute of Technology, and my old and dear friend, Atom, who did a marvelous job in introducing the topic today. That was actually quite masterful. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes? All right.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, so the next technical challenge is to share my slides. Got my fingers crossed here. That those are being appropriately shared. Okay, all right. The slides are there. Can I get a head nod that those are coming through okay?
The slides are coming through.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. So the topic is as indicated, and I'm still adjusting my screen so that I can see everything. And I've chosen as a topic consistent with the theme of the workshop and the meeting, and very consistent with the remarks that Adam just made that were quite comprehensive and really set the stage. This topic of engineering medicine for a global society. We can certainly include technology, engineering and technology in medicine for a global society. In our effort to meet the challenges that were already articulated and beautifully outlaid by Tom. I begin with making note that at the beginning of each year, in the city of Davos, there is this World Economic Forum. It's typically held in January, February. The last one was held about that time. This year it's been delayed and won't be held until May or so because of Omicron. But in the last meeting at the World Economic Forum, which is committed to improving the state of the world, as shown here, they discuss the major challenges. And among those major challenges is health and healthcare. And they made note that what is really needed is a major transformation of the healthcare system in order to do a better job of disease prevention and health promotion, with the overarching goal of everything that everybody who's involved in the medical and healthcare arena seeks to do, although we approach it from different perspectives. The overarching goal is to have health and longevity, and stated here, to live better and longer lives. Now, if we look at some of the challenges across the globe, they are quite varied. And we realize that medicine is practiced differently depending on location, that the access to health and healthcare really is dependent in large part, often, unfortunately, on where you live. And that the issues that we face are reasonably variable. But as the world has become flatter and flatter, as Tom Friedman pointed out a couple of decades ago, and so hyper-connected as we appreciate now with the pandemic, the range of challenges that we face in any location are relevant to us in every location. Here in Africa and in Kenya, you see the emphasis. If you look on the far right there, we're looking at the World Health Organization's list of concerns, or infectious diseases, not just COVID, that's certainly one of them, but malaria continues to be a problem, COVID, measles and rubella, and what I had thought was almost eliminated from the planet was polio. I remember being visited several years ago before I left the NIH by Bill Gates, and he made a presentation, and he was so proud that the Gates Foundation had played a role in limiting polio to just 2 countries. Well, apparently this is now broken out in other areas. So those challenges exist. And in the US, it's also true. You hear, it's not just here, it's a fact that your zip code is more determinative of your life expectancy and your lifespan than is your genetic code. And that speaks to this variation in the delivery of healthcare and geography. And the range of challenges that are faced across the globe are considerable, but relate to almost every country. The challenge of reaching into rural areas, underserved areas. In this country, they're rural across the world. They're in remote locations. So taking health services to remote areas, now with mobile clinics, the advent of portable ultrasound is one of the types of point-of-care technologies that Tom mentioned, that my old institute, NIBIB, played a key role in developing. This resulted from an initiative that we had to promote point-of-care technologies over a decade ago, and the first of those with this battery-powered handheld, fully diagnostic ultrasound device called a V-Scan that was produced by GE with a research grant from NIBIB, is now reaching across the country. And there are much even smaller versions of this, where you have these handheld transducers that plug into cell phones, as an example. And mental illness, invisible but devastating. We're now appreciating how prevalent this is and how much of a real problem it really is for this society and for all societies. The challenges that we face have to be met by advances both in understanding basically what goes on in the human body, coupling that with innovations and developments for technologies that will address the challenges that we face and make use of that understanding. Illustrated here in this work by Donald Stokes from a few decades ago that's often referenced now, where he talked about the advantage of working in pasturist quadrant. And pasturist quadrant is illustrated by this diagram here, where we have this 2x2 plotting of research in which the goal of research is an innovation where there's consideration for use, typified by the invention of the light bulb and Thomas Edison, or research is being done to gain fundamental understanding of processes typified by the research of Niels Bohr and his elucidation of the atom, and where these two intersect, where there's use-inspired basic research typified by the very impactful basic and then translational research of Louis Pasteur, and this being designated as Pasteur's quadrant. I would submit that actually there is interchange among all of these quadrants, that basic research gives rise to research that seeks to develop technologies that uses that. And then once you develop technologies, that allows you to make additional basic discoveries. But certainly when one does use-inspired basic research, those transformations that evolve over time increase. And the idea, and I should say the goal, is to develop transformations in healthcare, in the healthcare arena. And the increase in transformations over time occurring most at the greatest rate when there is use-inspired basic research, while we recognize that there is a continuous interplay among all of these quadrants, and that is the nature of research. And certainly, I think the funding agencies should appreciate that there is value in all of these in order to develop innovations which will make differences and transform how we live better lives and longer lives over time. So this concept of living longer and better lives has been capitalized upon with a two-word phrase that I'm particularly fond of and challenge, called healthy longevity. Healthy longevity is now a global grand challenge championed by the National Academy of Medicine, led by the U.S. National Academy of Medicine. But it is indeed a global activity and global effort in which 30 other countries participate in this activity and have participated. It started 2 years ago. It is actually a 5 to 7 year prize competition that is being executed in 3 phases. The first phase is called the Catalyst Award phase, in which small seed grants are given to individuals or groups that propose research that will help achieve this goal of better life and longer life, healthy longevity. And that phase is ongoing now. And this will give rise to a demonstration phase, and then actually a competition phase will be the third phase, in which a $5 million or multiple $5 million prizes will be available for those groups of individuals who develop the research that's most effective in helping us to achieve this goal of healthy longevity. So the first year that this was held, there were in the US 27 3 or so or 4 awards, Catalyst Awards that were given. Approximately a third of them involved technology and engineering, as illustrated here. And some of the interesting innovations that were proposed that involved technology are shown here. Continuous hemodialysis. So hemodialysis hasn't fundamentally changed since I finished medical school, and that was in 1979. You still have to connect a person to this device. And it's very imposing to have this. You know, you do that 3 days a week. With the advent in other areas, this advances here are long overdue. So here is one proposal to do so. Nanocatalytics, these small nano-sized metals, which when metabolized, accelerate enzymatic actions, have not really been explored in their potential to improve the human health span, but though that was a proposal here. Deep learning to predict biological age and daily vital signs monitoring. Having that kind of feedback could be very impactful in helping us to adjust our daily behaviors so that they're more healthy. And here's one that I really liked when I first saw this and look forward to seeing this. But imagine having an avatar of your younger self and how from a behavioral and social science standpoint, this might impact your psyche and your thinking and your behavior throughout the day. If you see a version of your younger self and you're continually aspiring to maintain that and to be like that. This is a very interesting idea, and we look forward to seeing what impact realizing this concept might have on achieving this goal of healthy longevity. So this past fall, as a co-chair of this Catalyst Award Selection Committee, I had the privilege and the honor of announcing the U.S. winners in the Catalyst Awards in 2021. And of the 23 awards that were given, several of them, again, about a third of them involved technological innovation. And I've highlighted here in red some of them. Automatically refocusing reading glasses, as an example, or soft bioelectronics like the one shown here, that look at multiple features, multimodal soft bioelectronics that might facilitate improved assessment of your state of health or disease. Interventions for aging that are related to pain, and which involve the music in your home and having music in your home that correlate with how you move and your body movements, indicating your level of movement and whether or not it is normal, or if you're not so well and you're slowing down, and indicating that that as a real-time indicator of how you are functioning on a day-to-day basis and whether or not there are changes such that you should seek some medical intervention, medical help, and diagnosis early on in the process. Cuffless blood pressures, initiative that Atom is probably quite familiar with, that we instituted at NIBIB in partnership with India well over a decade ago. Is now progressing in this goal of analyzing the dynamic signatures of blood pressure on a day-to-day basis as being more informative. Personalized AI and multimodal feedback in adults to improve their balance and inhibit falling, which is a major impediment to health. As you age, once you break a limb and you impede your mobility, you'd be surprised at how deleterious being immobile is to one's health. And here's a neat idea: repurposing the light bulb. So we know that light at specific wavelengths can be quite stimulating. The neurotransmitter serotonin is responsive to light emissions at a specific wavelength. And so the idea was to have a light bulb that is capable of emitting light at a stimulating wavelength that would enhance your health and well-being. And imagine coupling this with some of the sensors that, for example, determine whether or not your emotion and your habits and the way you're behaving in the home is consistent with what you normally do or indicates some downturn in your pattern, and automatically adjust the light bulb to stimulate you in a way such that you have a more healthy behavioral pattern. Transcranial focused ultrasound, which has been shown to have a transitory ability to open cell membranes and blood-brain barrier. This for delivering antibodies for brain imaging and for therapy. Doing both imaging and therapeutics, something we refer to as theranostics, which I'll mention briefly at the end also. So in the summer of 2020, just as we were really in the throes of the first wave of the pandemic, I wrote this perspective piece on engineering better medicine for public health crisis and the future, published by the National Academy of Medicine. And in this, I was making the point that what we really need at concept in Pasteur's quadrant is a deeper integration of clinicians and engineers and technologists to meet our challenges. We really do need to purposefully bring these disciplines and practitioners in these disciplines together. This needs to be a conjoint, a group, an integrated, a team effort, a team activity. We need to integrate across medicine, sociology, and engineering. You know, it's a combination of medicine and engineering, but also behavioral aspects. And Atom also beautifully touched on this. Something that I sort of refer to as convergence engineering. The innovations that would be the targets should be designed with accessibility, ease of use, and social application in mind. We got to not only think of what it is we're going to do, but how we're going to do it and where it's going to be deployed. And those aspects are reflective of this concept of social application in mind. We need to provide approaches to help address the socially based inequities. We now certainly more than ever recognize how interconnected we are and what affects people in one location it can affect all of us. The concept of integrating across disciplines, but integrating also across locations and across locales so that we don't have these disparities in healthcare that eventually will impact all of us, is reflected in the compounding of the crisis that we face now, that are all interconnected. So the public health crisis that began in early 2020, continuing through this day, are not only medical, they may have begun as a medical crisis, but clearly have had a major economic impact. And this is something that is very much front and center now, is the economic impact, but also the social impact. And the social impact interfaces with and compounds the economic impact. And both of these are derived from the medical challenges. So we need to address all of these with a more holistic approach. We are in a phase now of the pandemic where the numbers are beginning to come down in terms of the Omicron variant. But as the headlines indicate, we're just not out of the woods yet. And even after Omicron comes down, we're still going to have to learn how to live with this virus, the potential, and not only potential, the reality of continuous mutations of the virus, particularly as some people remain unvaccinated, So we see now that just these headlines are all within the last 7 days, probably. Each one of these headlines, last 7 days. We see the U.S. Surgeon General has tested positive, Queen Elizabeth, that we just learned, and her son, Prince Charles, and his wife, Camilla, have tested positive now. And this commentary from the Atlantic magazine about the challenges and the ambiguities that we're facing now in this post-Omicron way of life, all of which could be impacted by having the technologies that bring some clarity and information into our daily lives and inform us about how to live our lives in a way that's safe and healthy. The advent of a subvariant of Overcrowd is now beginning to emerge, and with concerns that the subvariant of Overcrowd may be even more severe than Omicron itself. So the White House has taken aim at this. The Office of Science and Technology Policy, often referred to as OSTP, is the office that you may have heard about, has issued this pandemic preparedness guideline and proposal with an eye towards the future. How do we continue to meet the challenges imposed by the pandemic, and how do we meet the challenges that will befall us when the next pandemic occurs, or when the next major infection occurs, as it surely will? So they outline this goal in several areas that I found quite resonant with our thinking, with the comments that Atam mentioned, with the comments that I'm making now about integrating across the disciplines of technology, of medicine, and sociology, is what we really need in order to do these things. We need to transform our medical defenses. How? Vaccines made rapidly, therapeutics being produced even before we get to the stage of a pandemic, and making diagnostics inexpensive and available at a large scale in weeks. You know, it's taken us a while to get to the point where we have broad availability of diagnostics manufactured at the large scale, again, as Tom pointed out. So transforming medical defenses, ensuring situational awareness. This is where technology and sociology come together. Early warning systems, real-time monitoring systems would be very, very valuable in this regard. So technology plays a role here. It's sort of indicated in this diagram, where we take advantage of digital systems with which all of us interact to participate in this early warning approach. Strengthening the public health systems. What does that mean? Expanding our capabilities to respond to emergencies. We need more modernized infrastructure. This certainly involves point-of-care technologies, particularly as we prioritize vulnerable communities. We need to reach into those vulnerable communities. How do we do that? With point-of-care technologies. Those technologies can give us important feedback on what's happening in those communities that will improve our connectivity and give us the data on which to mount appropriate actions. And then the core capabilities, the fact that these technologies that are needed need to be cost-effective, available, broadly reusable when they can be reused. These all speak to technological innovation. And the management should be done in such a way. I like this concept a lot, because it speaks to a systems engineering type of approach. The way it was done when we put a man on the moon, the Apollo program, from stem to stern, was managed systemically. You knew what the goal was, you knew where you were technologically, you knew what technology needed to be, you took into consideration where, what, and when, and how. All of those things were done and managed closely to make sure that you could achieve that target. And so going forward, we need that kind of overall approach. The one thing that I would add is we really do need to adapt to underserved communities. I think this is still under addressed. It requires more focus to reach into the underserved communities. And in this regard, I think as we look at our teams that will participate in addressing these sorts of challenges, we need to include in those teams not only the frontline healthcare workers, not only the doctors and nurses and the physicians, but engineers and technologists need to be a part of this holistic team to make sure that the approaches, the innovations, and the translation of those innovations are practical and successful. This concept of the benefit of team effort is really illustrated by the success we've had in the rapid development of vaccines. Where would we be now if we didn't have vaccines? We're still struggling, of course, with Omicron, but we do have a major weapon in our arsenal, and those are multiple vaccines. Those vaccines, while were produced in 11 months after the sequence of the Omicron of the COVID virus was made public, and there was record timing, it really happened over 17 plus years. And it involved a lot of people in a lot of different areas. And it really speaks to this team effort. It was a team effort that got accelerated under the challenge of the pandemic and the focus of the government to bring everything that we had to bear. But 17 years ago, the demonstration by Weissman and Carrico that you could stimulate a living organism, a monkey, to produce a specific protein that you had identified was demonstrated. And then subsequently showing that you could use mRNA, a vaccine, to do so, and to do this within, shortly after the scientists in China posted the genetic sequence of a virus. And then once that genetic sequence was known, producing an mRNA that specifically coded for the protein of interest, and that protein of interest being the spike protein, being able to do that immediately. But the work didn't stop there. You still needed some way to deliver the mRNA that codes for the spike protein. How was that delivery done? It's done in such a way that the immune system would not attack the mRNA that's being produced and injected. And so we had this lipid bubble encasing the mRNA. That was based on 25 years of work by multiple scientists. And one of them, Peter Cullis at the University of British Columbia, who spent his whole life developing lipid nanoparticles for transporting mRNA. And an additional work aimed at producing not only a spike protein, but a spike protein from mRNA, a spike protein that was stable, and stable long enough that the human immune system could mount an appropriate response. And that work being done by Barney Graham and Kazmika Corbett at the NIH, along with a colleague here at UT Austin. So the point is that there was this team effort across the board that involved nanotechnology and biological and bioengineering, an area that we now call immunoengineering, where you modulate the immune system, described 2 years before COVID really broke out in this review article talking about immunoengineering, engineering of the RNA sequence, and mRNA engineering was described 2 years before this vaccine was developed. The focus on technological innovation. So this is an area of tremendous promise and considerable activity, I think, in the future is there to modulate the immune system in a variety of diseases. It's really highlighted now by the pandemic, but other diseases as well. Autoimmune diseases being prime among them to turn down the immune system when it attacks itself, or to amp it up in the case of cancer, as we develop vaccines against cancer. But immunoengineering of the future, highlighted here by these recent prominent articles here in Science and Nature. But immunoengineering here, where we're developing a work that advances us towards a vaccine that is effective against any virus, pan virus, what Tony Fauci calls, and for some time has advocated, is a universal vaccine. But here is a work on bispecific antibodies. That means antibodies that not only attach to one specific targeted site on the coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2 virus, in particular the spike protein, but multiple sites of the spike protein, so that when mutations occur, you have a better likelihood of being effective against those mutations in that virus. Additional technologies that take a new approach, that of attacking the virus particles before they actually infect the person and stimulate the immune system. There's artist illustration indicating here this sort of DNA type of cloak that has antibodies specific to the spike protein itself, and it will recognizes the coronavirus particle as it invades, and before the coronavirus particle can attach itself to the receptor sites within the person, it's cloaked and encased by the shielding device that then inhibits it from attaching to the receptors in the target individual. And here we have the smart mask that was proposed by Jim Collins now about a year ago, and actually has been produced, where the face mask not only shields you from being infected and from spreading an infection, but if you became infected, wouldn't it be wonderful if the mask also indicated that you are infected? And that's the idea here. It has this three-stage process that uses a variant of the CRISPR technology, CRISPR-Cas13 as opposed to Cas9. Cas13, Cas13 is an enzyme that is particularly efficient in lysing viral RNA, whereas Cas9 lyses DNA. And so we have this three-stage process with a reporter molecule. The reporter molecule is joined when it attaches to the target, which in this case would be the coronavirus, the spike protein. It is then lysed, and the lysing of this produces this reporter molecule, which is then found and attached by an antibody connected with a particular color-coded nanoparticle. That is collected in the site that specifically is here is labeled with antibodies against the particle, which is produced with the lysing of the reporter molecule. And that indicates a positive response, much the way it works now with a home pregnancy test, or even the home test that we have now for reporting antigens being present. But this being a part of a mask was the concept reported this past summer as wearable materials that with embedded synthetic biology sensors that enable one to detect the presence of a target viral particle, in this case, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and it would then not only shield you, but report out whether or not you happen to be carrying that virus. We've also seen wearable sensor data that has emerged. And just early on, this was the fall of the first year of the coronavirus, indicating that sensor data from devices like this that many of us wear now, the iWatch, the Apple Watch that I'm wearing, and even the Oura ring that I'm wearing here, the kind of biomimetic data that you get from that, in conjunction with the symptomatology, was shown to be predictive of having being positive coronavirus, and more predictive than just having that data alone. And then subsequently, a year later, the group from Stanford, Mike Snyder and his colleagues, have reported that analyzing heart rate data was predictive of an individual carrying the coronavirus 2 days or so before that individual became test positive. Imagine being able to predict that you're positive before 2 or 3 days before your test is positive, and how this would reduce the exposure that you provide to other individuals, and how important that would be, how it would reduce the tracing, the amount of tracing that has to be done. Moving forward now to our ability to advent for more point-of-care devices and addressing the major challenges that we face, even beyond the infectious challenges that we have. And one of the biggest ones is elevated blood pressure. When we talk about an abnormality that is very determinative of morbidity and mortality across the globe, none is greater than elevated blood pressure. So the statement here that high blood pressure is the #1 cause of death, disability in the world, yet it is preventable, speaks to our need to have more continuous monitoring of blood pressure if we are to achieve this goal of healthy longevity. Specifically, that concretely, quantitatively, knowing that your blood pressure is 10 millimeters of mercury elevated, the systolic blood pressure is elevated, is very important, because it leads to a 20% difference in major cardiovascular events, major meaning heart attack or death. So just a 10 millimeter change in systolic blood pressure has that level of impact. In the statement here, the risk of death and stroke doubles for every 20 millimeters of mercury change in your systolic blood pressure, or 10 millimeters in the diastolic blood pressure. Bottom line is knowing what your blood pressure is and keeping it within a normal range, even if it's just 10 to 20 millimeters above the normal range, is highly, highly impactful. So one of my colleagues at A&M, Rusbeh Jafari, is developing this bioimpedance device, which has superior features to it relative to PPG type optical devices. Basically, he has his devices with an array of bioimpedance sensors that image across the wrist, detect the arterial wave, look at a waveform, and from that waveform, extract an index of blood pressure. Atom also mentioned Tiffany Lash, who is head of the point of care activity and program at NIBIB, one of my old colleagues. And now my successor, Bruce Tromberg, have been very active in supporting advances in point of care. And in fact, working with the commercial sector and manufacturing sector to produce home test kits, including the ones that have quantum dot sensors. And taking this a step further, making the diagnosis of point of care, making the diagnosis of infection at the point of care is one goal, but an additional goal really is to be able to treat the person, vaccinate the person at his or her home would be a tremendous advance so that you could not only diagnose whether or not you are infected, but have a vaccine delivered to you in the mail in the form of a vaccine patch like this is the concept. This was a breakthrough advance just before I left the NIH, and I'm holding it up there, making the point that this vaccine patch is something that could be picked up in a drugstore the way we now pick up our diagnostic kits, or sent to you in the mail, and would be able to deliver a vaccine. This is a microneedle patch, 100 biodegradable microneedles in this small patch, which also, because they're in a solid form, obviates the need to store this in a refrigeration, that the refrigeration is not needed, and obviates the need to restore it in a refrigerated environment, which means you could conceivably deliver this in the mail. What a marvelous advance that would be. So this is what we're talking about. Now, we still need to work towards this. I had a video, but in interest of time, I won't show the video that talks about this particular concept. And then the idea of being able to detect whether or not an individual is developing a septic condition, is becoming septic. Sepsis is the most common pathway that we have towards death in the hospital now. And it can often be a rather stealthy diagnosis. It goes through stages. The early stages of systemic immune response syndrome, in which the body mounts a response to this and tries to kill the offending virus, is one stage. But if not appropriately treated, it can advance to this situation, which is a compensatory adaptive response syndrome, in which this is a change from trying to kill or eliminate the offending virus, but more to modulate the organ systems throughout the body so that there is greater homeostasis. And when that happens, this can be a very challenging situation, leading to organ dysfunction, impaired recovery, or even death. So knowing that you are septic at all of these stages and being able to predict the stepwise progression would be important. And colleagues, here, my colleague Rashid Bashir, who is the Dean of Engineering at Illinois, and also Associate Dean of Carle, Illinois College of Medicine, has developed this point of care technology, this platform technology, which takes a drop of blood, analyzes not only the inflammatory cells that are responsive to an infection, but proteins and protein markers that would be indicative of what stage or what sort of characteristic features you have of the stage of infection and indicate where you are in that sequence that I just illustrated in the previous slide. In doing so, with the advent of artificial intelligence that looks at the compilation of these various components of cells and proteins and biomarkers that are indicative of such, and what you should test for that indicate where you are in that process, could be very powerful. And they've developed the technology and are developing the technology to do so. Then I'm going to close with this interesting work from Philip Lowe at Purdue, who is developing what I referred to previously as a theranostic device. This theranostic here addresses prostate cancer, attacking the prostate-specific membrane antigen, attacking it in the sense of using it as a target for diagnosis and also as a target for delivering a therapeutic, all in the same, in one nano construct, the so-called theranostic. Here, he takes advantage of having identified the construct of the prostate-specific membrane antigen. And once knowing the shape and configuration of that antigen, was able to identify this sort of cleft and opening within the antigen, developing then intelligently a protein specific in size and conformation that it would fit into this cleft. And that protein then carrying both a diagnostic, a fluorescent molecule, and a therapeutic, a radioactive molecule that would do two things. One, identify that there is prostate cancer there, being shown here, this lymph node metastases in this individual, and the metastases in the bone are being shown here with this particular reporter molecule. But using that same nano construct, now labeled with lutetium-177, to deliver a therapeutic effect. So here we have a classic bone scan. Some of the areas that are shown, light up here, so to speak, are normal. So the kidneys normally take up this material, so those are normal. But the ones that are abnormal, highlighted in red, they're throughout the skeletal structure in this individual prostate metastatic cancer, before and then after being treated with this nano theranostic that not only showed where the prostate cancer was, but after some time, the level of cancer is basically eliminated. The work was so promising, the clinical study so promising, that the FDA awarded this as a breakthrough status just this past summer, and this now has been sold to Novartis, as you can see here, for substantial funds. And my final set of slides, I keep saying final here, almost there, but a similar concept from Kobayashi and Peter Choike, my old colleagues at the NIH, developing a near-infrared photoimmunotherapy, a molecule that takes an antibody that targets a cancer cell. The antibody carries with it this nanoparticle that has a high affinity for absorbing light at a frequency that penetrates the skin. So this the tissue, this near infrared window, has high transmission. The idea then is to deliver this particle because it has an antibody that targets the cancer cell that carries the nanoparticle that absorbs the light, it absorbs the infrared, that causes the cancer cell to then swell. It kills the cell. That's the photoimmunotherapy aspect. But it not only does that, it releases antigens from the cancer cell. The antigens then stimulate the immune system so that the immune system can then attack any residual cancer cells. I think this is a marvelous idea that does two things. It directly attacks the cancer cell, and then it stimulates the immune system to also assist in this process and attack any residual cancer cells. This is the approach that we're taking with this combination of engineering and medicine, and creating this new cadre of individuals that we call physicianaires, who have this approach in their training, where we're integrating across medicine and engineering in the same brain and the same mind, so that we produce individuals who have this kind of intellect and thinking about problems that is based on an integration of engineering and biology. This individual we call a physicianaire, develop and train to specifically develop innovations based on this knowledge, and having this knowledge at their fingertips that are practical solutions that we face around the world and the challenges that we face around the world. Those are such individuals, and I close with this quote: if we think today as we thought yesterday, we will rob ourselves of tomorrow. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pettigrew. That was very inspiring and comprehensive presentation, and it gave us an excellent overview where we are today and how we are creating pathways to the future practice of the medicine and engineering better medicine, as you pointed out with one of the grand challenges. So I am very grateful for your time, and thank you so much. In the interest of the time, we will take just one question, but we will come back for the additional questions at the end. Do I have any question from the audience here? So I have one quick question. As you know that we have been looking into the basic applied and the translational science, engineering, and medicine. When you put together these kind of programs like NMed that you are leading today at Texas A&M, how do we promote this transdisciplinary approach of having early preparedness for these leaders who will take engineering approaches to the medicine for preventive and precision medicine? How do we prepare them?
Adam, I'm sorry, I'm not only temporally challenged, I can blame that on the difference in time zone, so I kind of lost track of where I am relative to the schedule. But I also did not hear your message. You started and then it cut out, and then I just heard at the very end. So I missed your question.
Okay, my question was that how do we prepare these new leaders who are well trained for creating engineering approaches to the precision and personalized medicine?
Yeah, so I think we have an opportunity to start at the beginning with our students to let them know that this is a team activity. I was going to say a team sport. When you and I came along, we really sort of learned our disciplines in our discipline, and then down the road, you would look for areas of application. But today, we have the opportunity at the very beginning to let students know that if you're really going to make a difference in the world, the difference is most likely going to come from a team effort and a team activity. And look from the beginning to have interaction and crosstalk with someone who has expertise in an area that's synergistic with yours, but directed towards the same target and the same goal set. In this case, having sustainable communities, and among the challenges that we face with sustainable communities, health and healthcare for all.
Okay, thank you so very much, and my deep appreciation to your time and your participation again. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, and have a good day. Thank you all.
We are running behind the schedule, and my apologies to the panelists who have been online. So in the interest of the time, I'm requesting in the panelists that we will move the Q&A session at the end. But it's my great pleasure now to introduce Dr. Arunan Sikandaraja. Arunan serves as a White House Presidential Innovation Fellow within the FDA. He supports the agency's digital transformation, developing programs and the resources to use the agency's unique data and modern analytics to protect the public health. I met Arunan sometime back when he was with the Gates Foundation, and now he's at White House. So I'm very grateful, Arunan, for your time and putting together this panel. You take it from here.
Great. Thank you. Is everyone able to hear me okay? Can I get a quick check? Okay. So I'm not yet
Good.
seeing my slides.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Okay. So if needed, I'm also happy to share. Just let me know, Daniel.
Right, set, you just have to go to the top.
Yeah, those are Steve's slides. I mean, I'm happy to either speak without slides or I'm happy to share my own. Just let me know.
Gonna pass you the ball.
Okay, great. I'll go ahead and share, and hopefully this will work since we have not tested this. Okay, so is everyone able to see this?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak and really
I don't think we see your
introduce.
slides, we just see your desktop.
Oh, okay. Then it's not good.
This is, no.
Okay. So Dan, you don't have the slides? Oh,
Dan, did you find the slides?
Pulling up the slides now.
Dan got the slides. Okay,
Okay.
he's putting it up.
Great.
Sorry about that. Dan, do you have it or not?
Yeah, give us a sec.
Yeah, so while we wait, I'll just share a few words to say that this. Oh, great. All right. Well, everyone, welcome to our first panel. Really feel privileged to introduce my three colleagues today. And just to tie this panel to the broader flow of this meeting, I want to return to the slide that Dr. Dewan shared, which highlighted how infrastructure enablers ensure that the types of innovations that Dr. Pettigrew spoke about really have an impact on the types of global societies that we've been describing. And each of our panels will hit several of these themes, but just to keep them in the front of your mind, as we think about technology, research, and innovation, we must serve a very diverse set of users. And those users vary from urban to rural, but also across geographies. And as we think about managing the complexities of not just pandemic response, but also the chronic diseases that Dr. Dewan described, you need to not only design with these users, but you need to design for the systems in which they exist. And as we get through the comments for Dr. Manabe, she'll really dive into how those challenges vary and how delivering in limited resource settings requires innovation, not just in your technology, but in your processes of how you deliver. And then we'll kind of return to this idea of trust and delivery as well. As we've all seen in the US, our governance and policies have driven increasing uptake of the COVID-19 vaccine, though there are still challenges. But as you kind of step back to other potential innovations, the types of groups that you'll have to align and build trust in extend beyond just the user to the payers, providers, and the regulators involved. Next slide, please. Just to put some data behind these types of structural barriers, I want to share just a few graphics with you. So across the top is the division of global health R&D funding across wealth quartiles defined by the World Health Organization. And these types of funding patterns, unless we're very careful and take the integrated approaches that have been described already, will lead to blind spots. And quite dramatically, $35 billion out of the $35.4 billion invested by the agencies that the WHO tracks go to high-income countries like the US and Europe. So as we think about the world that we live in, the world that we experience day to day, it may not represent that of the broad swaths of the country and the world highlighted on the bottom left, such as parts of South America, Africa, Asia, and Australia, as well as parts of the rural North America, where it's not as simple as calling your doctor or driving up to an urgent care clinic. By your mode of transportation, it may take minutes to hours to access care. Along with this variability, which drives towards the point of care technology that we've been describing, there's also tremendous complexity. And this isn't just the biological complexity and physical complexity, it's also the range of stakeholders that have to interact for a patient to deliver care, to receive care from their provider. And while we may think of it as a one-to-one interaction, the snapshot on the bottom right conveys how providers must be financed by a payer, whether it's Medicare or a private insurance company. They must receive materials through complex global supply chains. And all of that is monitored for quality, safety, and effectiveness by a range of regulators like the Food and Drug Administration. And this is just one snapshot, and it's important to keep in mind that each of these components will appear as a different kind of permutation depending on where you are in the world. Next slide, please. So there is hope. I think the types of programs like engineering medicine, like REDX, which Dr. Steve Schachter will describe, create an opportunity for multiple sectors to come together, either divided by traditional disciplinary boundaries or public and private, to co-create and enable users, payers, providers, and regulators to provide their feedback early. And while there's no substitute for that type of early stage collaboration, as innovators, I want you all to keep in mind the importance of enabling flexibility for your care systems. And that means keeping the cost down so that your cost benefit for a given environment makes sense, and driving down complexity. And in the US, that might mean enabling at-home testing with microneedle patches. But in the developing world and across parts of the kind of the traditional global South, this may allow for community healthcare workers and alternate care delivery models, which we know have been highly successful and highly integrated with their communities. And finally, and before I introduce our panelists, I'll just say that we shouldn't, as innovators, expect our solutions to be silver bullets. We need to build systems of innovation that allow ongoing feedback and an ongoing role for that innovator in understanding how these technologies roll out. So away from silver bullets to truly integrated innovation systems. And with that, I'm happy to introduce Dr. Schachter to describe how multiple sectors came together around COVID, Dr. Hyatt to describe how systems make decisions to integrate new technologies and what types of perverse incentives may be set up through how we pay for care. And finally, we'll kind of scale this up to the global perspective with Dr. Manabe describing how the processes by which we deliver care must also be optimized to capture the kind of the benefit, the promise of the innovations that many of you are working on in your labs today. With that, thank you, and over to Steve.
Thank you very much, Arunan. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you great.
Yes.
Okay, great, terrific, thank you. And my thanks to Dr. Dewan for the kind invitation as well, and for organizing a wonderful meeting. So my name is Steve Schachter. I'm affiliated with a group physically located in Boston called CIMMIT, Consortia for Improving Medicine with Innovation and Technology, and it's been our pleasure to help, along with 4 other sites across the country, on a project called RADx Tech, the Rapid Acceleration of Diagnostics. Next slide. The process really started with the appropriation of $1.5 billion from Congress to NIH back just almost 2 years ago. And a couple days before Congress voted on the funds, Senators Alexander from Tennessee and Blunt from Missouri published an op-ed in the Washington Post where they strongly advocated for the need for COVID-19 tests, saying that there would be no viable path forward for the country without adequate testing. And so that launched the RADx Tech program, next slide, with the dedicated, if I could have the next slide, please, with the full support of NIH director at the time, Francis Collins, and the NIBIB director, in fact, Dr. Pettigrew's successor, Bruce Stromberg. So RADx Tech started officially on April 29th, 2020, with a call for proposals. The mission for the group was to get to the marketplace COVID-19 diagnostics that at the moment were in the translational phase, and to do so all within the calendar year 2020. And those of you who've been involved in medtech development programs, you would, of course, recognize that that timeline is at best aspirational and at worst totally impossible. But nonetheless, that was our marching orders. Next slide, please. So we very quickly put together a national team of people. This was likened to the like a mini Manhattan project by Senator Alexander. The foundation of this effort, extramural side, was the POCTER network, the Point of Care Translational Research Network, which is now in its third of 5-year cycle. And that POCTER network consists of 5 centers. The one in the middle is CIMIT, which has the organizing, is a coordinating center, and the other 4 POCTER centers have expertise in a variety of technological and clinical areas. You'll be hearing from Dr. Manabe from the Johns Hopkins site a little later. And we even went so far as to add additional people to the team, consultants, content experts in a variety of engineering, manufacturing, and medical fields, so that there's now over 900 people working on RADx Tech. A couple of our POCTER centers established core laboratories, such as the laboratory at Emory, which provided benchtop testing of COVID-19 diagnostics for purposes of generating data the FDA would evaluate in their emergency use authorization decisions. But the partnership and collaboration went on the 900 total experts to include multiple other federal agencies on a very close, and I would say unprecedented, working relationship, including FDA, BARDA, HHS, the Defense Department, CMS, as well as several foundations, such as the Rockefeller Foundation. And a truly unique blending of private, academic, government, and charitable foundations to tackle this problem. Next slide. So we started with a call for proposals late April 2020. There were over 3,000 applications put in. 705 of these underwent an evaluation, starting with a group of experts, and we set up this funnel structure you see here, culminating in what is shown here as phase 2, which is which is large scale up in manufacturing of diagnostic tests. The goal being to be able to pump something like 6 to 7 million diagnostic tests into the US market every day. And 34 of the 705 projects that underwent initial evaluation made it all the way through to large scale up in manufacturing. Next slide. So as of the last month or two, the results of this program have achieved a cumulative capacity for producing tests of 1.7 billion. We are supplying well over 6 million tests a day to the U.S. market. There have been 38 discrete products with emergency use authorizations, including 6 approved for use at home, 5 of which are an antigen test, and 1 is actually a PCR quality RT lamp project. In the month of December, a couple months ago, it was estimated that there were 300 million antigen tests performed at home by U.S. citizens in our country. And we estimate about 2/3 of that came from the RADx Tech program. Next slide. So in summary, and it's hard to summarize a program that's been so large, so complicated, and so different from anything I would have ever been involved with after 2 years. I think there's some learnings, particularly appropriate for circumstance if there's another pandemic and with global implications as well. First of all, a pandemic can clearly galvanize people to work together who've never worked together before with a shared mission. I think that was key in RADx Tech. Secondly, the way in which we went about the evaluation blend of projects blended the best of academic with the best of business practices, and as such has been viewed as a new model for translational research to advance medical technology from the bench at a translational stage to the patient. In fact, there are already other new NIH programs that incorporate the RADx Tech process. Close communication with all stakeholder groups, including the key federal agencies, we found to be possible and critically important. And that kind of, I think that gets to what Dr. Pettigrew was referring to earlier as the mission control for a moonshot, is that there needs to be coordination across engineering groups, policymakers, local governments, and all the key stakeholders. And finally, the RADx Tech model, I think, which is more fully described in a series of papers in the Open Journal of EMBS, the RADx Tech model can be adapted with international partners. In other words, take this to a whole new level from a global perspective with international partners to solve major existing or future global health care unmet needs, whether those pop up like a pandemic or are chronic, such as malaria and other widespread diseases due to whether it's nutritional based, infectious disease, water quality, and so forth. I think we saw with RADx Tech the possibility of a truly integrative effort, bringing, again, to echo what Dr. Pettigrew said, engineers, doctors, public policymakers, the sociology, all that together. I think RADx Tech showed, in its way, as the first example of this, is possible and can be quite productive. So with that, I'll stop, Arunan, and hand it back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Steve, and forward to hopefully some questions later. So we'll go ahead and transition over to Dr. Hyatt, who can kind of speak to some of the challenges from the perspective of technology innovation and how society makes the decision to take some of these innovations forward. Over to you, Dr. Hyatt.
Yeah, thank you. Dan, do you have my slides? If there
Start on 26, I believe. Great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So I know we're short on time. I do want to offer to the audience, since I don't think we'll have time for a full Q&A, if you would like to email me any questions, I would be happy to respond. And that's very easy. It's jchyatt@mdic.org. So the Medical Device Innovation Consortium is my current home. I've been there about 1.5 years. I spent 36 years with Kaiser Permanente, which I'll get to in a moment. But as a consequence of the pandemic, was furloughed from KP and prior to my furlough, was invited to participate in the RADx project with Steve and Yuka, and it was absolutely fascinating to watch the success of that. Steve, thank you for your leadership. The Medical Device Innovation Consortium is a membership organization with industry, CMS, FDA, a number of other participants. It is a nonprofit, public-private partnership. It is the home of NEST Coordinating Center, the National Evaluation System for Healthcare Technologies, which was created to follow on after FDA approval to track in particular, the safety and effectiveness of devices with real-world evidence. And it is a really tremendous effort that is underway. Next slide, please. There are several components within MDIC, and I'm personally responsible for health economics and patient value. I work most closely on real-world evidence with the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS. And when I first started, it was in the midst of the Medicare Coverage for Innovative Technology proposed rule public comment, MCIT, which was ultimately repealed, and the agency is currently developing its replacement, the transitional coverage for emerging technologies. And this is a mechanism to attempt to bring coverage for technologies in a more accelerated way to benefit the Medicare beneficiaries specifically, but also to stabilize the entrepreneurial market, startup devices, et cetera. And we're partnering with CMS to work on that effort, and look forward to having something that will replace the previous MCIT rule. Next. Very quickly, I know New Jersey is not a location with Kaiser Permanente, so just wanted to share that it's the largest integrated healthcare system. It is a nonprofit, has over 12.5 million members. Next slide, please. Geographically, largely West Coast in terms of the dominant membership, but the Washington, D.C. area, Mid-Atlantic states is very large as well. It's approaching 1 million members itself. And also with the acquisition of the Group Health Puget Sound in Washington State, we have the entire West Coast currently in Kaiser Permanente. Next slide, please. So what I wanted to touch on is that there, as was mentioned briefly, there are misaligned and perverse incentives. And while this conference is focused on global opportunities, the reality is that the money sits in the United States. And without some commercial success in the domestic US market, it's very difficult for technologies to be successfully funded for development and to survive long term. So a technology that isn't paid for somehow doesn't benefit anyone, and that is the challenge that all of us face. The Kaiser Permanente world is actually closer to the reality of outside US healthcare, and I was pleased to be part of that. Frankly, I'm not a big fan of fee-for-service medicine, as you might guess from my long career with KP. But the question is, where are the incentives? And as Aruna noted, if the funding for something doesn't sit in the right place, it is very difficult. So next slide, please. Again, finding the money and understanding how it's going to flow is sadly a part of what you need to think about as you develop what may be a fantastic technology. It should be a no-brainer in terms of everybody should want to have access to it and pay for it, but sadly that doesn't always work. And a quick example would be where the technology is replacing something that would be normally performed in a hospital operating room, but perhaps moves it into an outpatient setting or even in the home for that particular care. But the money for that sits in the hospital budget, and their revenue comes from billing for those services. And so you will run into a brick wall when it comes to understanding how to navigate that. And it is a real challenge in the US market. One more click, please. So you have to be creative, and whatever it takes, it may involve talking with people that have been through this before. The Medical Device Innovation Consortium is a membership organization, but the work we do is open to anyone who would like to participate on a work group. If they're interested, please contact me if you're interested in the real world evidence and the work with CMS. It's a real privilege to have them participate in our committees, and I would be delighted to hear from you. So thank you, and back to you, Aruna.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe Carroll, and for really framing that and the opportunities for all of you to collaborate going forward in these types of organizations. With that, we'll go ahead and move to Dr. Manabe's comments, which I think were near the top of the deck you were sharing earlier, Dan. Yep, that's that there. All right, over to you, Dr. Manabe.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about resource limited settings, which Arunan actually had referred to earlier, but it's really important. It got cut off here, but it said they're not monolithic. And I think it's really important to think here at the top, we see the Central Public Health Lab in Uganda, high throughput, high complexity, very much involved in surveillance and public health. In the middle is a picture of Chiboga District Hospital, a place where I did some projects. Here, the reliability of electricity and water is intermittent at best. There's sort of medium throughput in terms of its ability to diagnose things, has skilled human resource, but a very unreliable supply chain. And then at the bottom, you see sort of the individual diagnosis, healthcare center, which could be very, very rural, where they may not have any infrastructure. And here we would be looking for diagnostics that would have low price and an ability to do the test without any devices and a low infrastructure setting. Next. So here I wanted you to think about use case. Which one of these settings would you want to use your, in this case, diagnostics, which is the area that I'm interested in? And you have to think deeply about that because you need to engineer for the use case that you're targeting. Next. Now, in order to know what that use case is, you probably need to know what the unmet need is. Many things have already been solved, and it's important for you to have an idea that's in an area of unmet need. And next to that, I have an icon for stakeholders because it's impossible to know what that unmet need is without meeting all of the stakeholders that may inform that unmet need decision and the use case. Next. So I think this then gets to what you think the intended use is for your device. And that's what we know in terms of FDA approvable or WHO pre-qualified diagnostics. Next. So here I have the concept to the left of you take a problem, you have the idea, you innovate, you tweak, and you keep going around in an iterative way, getting multidisciplinary input along the way in this systems engineering approach that Dr. Pettigrew spoke about. Equally, though, there are outside forces that you must consider. So in resource limited settings, I think the healthcare system needs, as well as the organizational context, are very important, but obviously you have to iterate through the clinical needs and performance as well as the technologic design. This is depicted as a circle going around and around because as you get further out, it usually incurs more time and cost. But without this kind of iteration, I think you can't have a successful product. And Dan, if you click through 3 times, at the bottom left, I have a book, Small is Beautiful, a book by E.F. Schumacher, where he definitely talks about how you want to have a technology that's cheap enough to be accessible, suitability for small scale application, but also compatible with man's need for creativity, which is really the subject of today's entire series. Next. So I wanted to give you one example here of tuberculosis diagnostics and talk about not just sort of engineering innovation, but also process innovation. So in order to diagnose somebody with TB, you have to identify them, you have to do a test, you have to return the result to the patient, and you then have to treat the patient for 6 months for them to get better. And you see all of the resources along the bottom that are necessary. Next. And so what we did in a project, so TB then magnifies health system shortcomings. Next. And so what we did was we decided to come up with a process innovation where we trained the people that were on site. We did faster tests using fluorescence microscopy and GeneXpert. We linked both the lab register and the clinic register, which meant that a quarter of the patients that were diagnosed were now found. And then we tracked not only the positives, but their contacts. And then on the next slide, I have the results of that program on the left-hand side. It's a little difficult to understand, but if you look at the upper left-hand, the Western districts and then sort of the Northwestern districts, many of those went into the yellow and green that had previously been red. And that is because those were the districts that the Infectious Disease Institute was in charge of using this particular process innovation. You see that big red section in the upper right-hand corner, that is Karamoja. That's a place where they had very poor TB control. But then by iterating on this concept with a very nomadic population along the right, you can see what happened over a year, that many of the indicators went from red to yellow and green. And so this kind of process innovation is something worth thinking about, not just what kind of technologic innovation you can have, but thinking about the use case, the intended use, but both engineering and process. I'm going to skip the next two slides for the purposes of time. This is a US example of the same sort of thing, but I want to pass over to Arunan so that we can try to maybe wrap up this panel with his final thoughts. Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you, Dr. Manabe, and thanks for walking us through those technological and process transitions. I won't take any more time here except to say that thanks again to the panelists for making the time to share their expertise and really start the conversation around how we adapt these types of systems to deliver the types of sustainable societies that NJIT is aspiring to along with all of us. With that, thank you, and over to panel 2.
Thank you so much, Arunan. I would also like to thank Dr. Sikandaraja, Dr. Schechter, Dr. Manabe, and Dr. Hyatt for your insight and very effective presentations, even though the short of time, but you all underscored the critical importance of resource and infrastructure in bringing the technology innovation to the user market. So thank you. This is my great pleasure to introduce the chair of the panel 2, Dr. Reina Panettiere. Dr. Panettiere is Vice Chancellor for Translational Medicine and Science at Rutgers University, and he is also the Director of New Jersey Alliance for Clinical and Translational Sciences, NJX, which truly has led the collaborative translational science and engineering into the medicine in New Jersey. And we are very blessed with the partnership and the collaboration with Rutgers in those NJX funded projects. So thank you so much, Dr. Panettiere, for joining us. And this is for you to take over now.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Dewan. It's a pleasure to be here. I know we're running tight on time, so I too would offer, if anybody have questions to me, they could certainly email. I'm happy to describe or help guide any questions. I'm really charged with looking at the future platforms for discovery to practice the policy. I think what we heard in the previous talk is amplified here in a global sense, but we think globally, but we have to pay for things locally. So much of what I'm going to talk about is actually the transformation that has occurred. Next slide. So as we, I don't think I'm driving, right? So next slide, please. Yep. Yeah. How do we improve health? Well, at least in the US, and we've just heard in other global markets, we have to really address social determinants of health. So for entrepreneurs out there, recognize that every patient is a snowflake, but Within those snowflakes, you get piles of snow. So you have to sort of dissect the two. What we face is a crisis in the US and globally in equity, diversity, and inclusion and access to care. So these are some of the things that we need innovations for whatever the innovator is producing. It has to be within this framework. Next slide. Really what we're talking about, next slide, is this concept. And if you could click through to, go back. Every disease is really heterogeneous. If I think about congestive heart failure or asthma, that's not just one disease. Embedded in that one disease are many subtypes. Now, if I have a new diagnostic tool, I could use that tool or that therapy to refine the subset of people who would respond. Now, as that becomes developed, those who don't respond actually go back into the pool to serve as the next heterogeneous group of individuals. Now, as you can see, there's heterogeneity not only in disease state, but also in response to therapy, meaning that if I took a pill, I respond uniquely compared to others that's not even within the context of the heterogeneity of therapy. So what does that mean to the entrepreneur? The entrepreneur needs to identify what subclass of patients will respond and how do I predict that response? Now, as we go through, and you just heard quite eloquently from the Kaiser Permanente model, is if I want to implement that new innovation, I have to have an adaptation or an adoption of the payers. I have to have physicians or providers write that test, and then the patients need to take it. Now, on the outside, we also have social determinants that work at every level. Matter of fact, it's shocking that we have any impact in health with the complexity that I just described. Next slide. So what do innovators need to do? Next slide. As you develop the concept, well, precision medicine for providers is really the right diagnosis for the right patient, the right therapy at the right time. The life cycle of humans suggests that early in life, you'll respond differently to a chronic illness than more mature individuals. Next slide. So that needs to be factored in. But what about population health? Does that confound precision medicine? 5, 6 years ago, 10 years ago, we were all talking about being precise in diagnosis and therapy, but we have to now live with a conceptual model of population health. Next slide. So what platforms are necessary? Well, I think a learning health system is important, population health, and we'll talk about implementation and dissemination science. Next slide. What is a learning health system? A learning health system really leverages internal data and experience with systematically integrated external evidence to put knowledge into practice. As a result, patients get higher quality, safer, more efficient care, and healthcare delivery organizations become better places to work. It's all wrapped into that concept of a learning health system. Next slide. So the innovator needs to recognize that it requires big data that are actionable, Next slide. Well, population health really describes a very complicated system by which, and you saw this in the previous descriptions, describes health status and health outcomes within a group of people rather than precision medicine. Each individual is a snowflake. Here you can see the genetics with concentric rings, with individual cognition and behavior, the social environment, which is really social determinants of health. And you can see how the politics actually plays into this. Matter of fact, next slide. What I want to leave you with is this concept, which I think is very important. Next slide. Your zip code is more important than your genetic code. Your zip code is more important in the delivery of care than your genetic code. So keep that in mind as you develop a new innovation, a new device or new software. you also have to take into account the social determinants of health. Next slide. Really future-facing and global health innovation is within this concept. Discovery, getting the practice, and policy are very intimately linked and bi-directional input. Next slide. But what ties that together? It is dissemination and implementation science. That augments the discovery, the practice, practice to discovery, discovery to policy. So processes at every one of those arrows has to demonstrate the value proposition for the entrepreneur who's using their new tools. Next slide. And what is our tool set? Well, I don't have time to go over it. It's point of care. Minimal touch trials, I think, is the wave of the future. No longer do we need bricks and mortar clinical research units. Personal monitoring, social media recruitment, and real world evidence are the tools in the sandbox that allows us to go from discovery to practice to policy. Next slide. Next slide. And again. Great. So what I'd like to do now is hear from our distinguished panelists. And we would ask the Carolyn to present, then Trina, and then George. So Carolyn, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. As introduced, my name is Caroline, and I'm delighted to join you today from Nairobi in Kenya. I work with AMREF, which is one of the largest African-led public health nonprofits in Africa. Our focus really is to improve health and to achieve health equity. We know that health innovations, from medical equipment to the Internet of Medical Things to AI to augmented reality, can really drive positive transformation in global public health. We also know that the innovations that change the world,
on the screen?
the innovations that change the world are those that reach the largest number of people. So from where we sit, there seems to be no shortage of great technology innovations for global health. Some are homegrown from the continent, many from outside Africa. But what we also see is that these great innovations are not guaranteed to succeed in one geography or transfer successfully across geographies. My work at AMREF circles around this problem. How do we scale impact? Not just scale great projects or great innovations, but scale impact. I don't know if we have all the answers to this question, but we have certainly learned many lessons, and I will share 3 of these lessons with you. They may seem obvious, but we see these issues cropping up time and again. Lesson 1, let's start with the innovation itself. The problem, what problem is that innovation solving? What size is that problem? Dr. Yuka referred to it as unmet need. Who sees it as a problem? Is it the innovator who defines it as a problem? Or is it the targeted consumer or the targeted client? Is the innovator really interested in solving the problem? Or is she more interested in pushing her own innovation? Those are questions that must be answered. Lesson 2, assuming that the rationale for the innovation is sound, we need to explore how to make it successful. Or put in a different way, assuming product efficacy, what would stand in the way of this innovation success? This may include things like policy, regulation, and standards. Do these exist? Evidence is required to de-risk adoption of innovation by governments who have a duty of care and who also have limited resources. Affordability. The approach to this question varies depending on who your payer is. Is the payer the patient, the health facility, the health worker, a government? How are the purchasing decisions made? Is it possible to increase access through social insurance schemes or inclusion of innovations as a staple in the government medical stores? Distribution. What sales and distribution channels and mechanisms will be leveraged? What are the pros and cons of government versus private sector supply chains? And then lastly, adoption. Say we're looking at a medical device. What evidence is needed to compel adoption by health workers? What training is required? Who will provide it and how? How will the innovation interface with the existing workflows in the health facility? Is the innovation shifting tasks to new cadres? And if so, is that covered by the regulator? These are just some additional factors that must be considered at the start and not at the end of innovation development or innovation transfer process. The third lesson is, of course, Africa is not a country. If you want to scale an innovation across multiple African countries, what cross-border issues would you need to consider? There are often heterogeneous policies and regulations, health worker scope of practice, health worker density, infrastructure differences, consumer literacy levels, health priority areas that differ. That would be good to think about from the onset. I will conclude with a statement that is usually attributed to Peter Drucker. There is nothing so useless as doing efficiently something that should not have been done at all. The challenge is how to differentiate between what should have been done and what should not have been done. Thank you.
Great. Well done. Thank you. Pushing on, Dr. Arenza, distinguished professor from NJIT. The floor is yours.
Can you hear me? No. Now? Yes.
Okay, now.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for having me, and I'm just going to speak briefly here about, again, another significant global health challenge, as well as give you some, really an example of some innovative technology that will address it, really in a very cost-effective manner. And so osteoarthritis is really, like I said, a significant global health problem. It's degeneration of your joints. And this really has been recognized by the World Health Organization as a leading cause of disability. And so here we're talking about the degradation of the cartilage in your joint and changes in underlying bone, as shown here. And so it affects over 300 million people worldwide and a significant number in the United States. But it's not only conditions, again, as you can see, of higher income countries. It is a significant problem. It's actually increasing in number in low to middle income countries as well. And so really, as you've heard today, it's a growing problem in aging population, as well as we have a significant kind of epidemic, really, with obesity. And so it also obesity is a risk factor as well. And so next slide here. And so really what I skipped here. Let's see if I can go back. Can I go back one? Oh yeah, here we go. Okay, and so there's no current technology that will regenerate or repair these tissues, and there's a number of, I said, risk factors, age being a significant one, but there's other unknown kind of risk factors that contribute to this. And so pharmacological agents do not work. Surgical interventions, current surgical interventions do not work. And so our innovative technology that we're worked on is the development of a bio-inspired material. And with early diagnosis, you can use this in combination with microfracturing techniques to repair these cartilage lesions. You can use it in an injectable form, which is also very cost-effective, as well as easily adaptable to different types of clinical settings. And so I won't go into the science of all of this, but I'll just highlight what's important here is that we were able to derive it from cellulose. Cellulose is derived from cotton. And so it's a ready available material, like I said, very cost effective. And what we're really mimicking here is what's currently in cartilage tissue, which are what are called these glycosaminoglycans, or for short, GAGs. And so we can modify the cellulose such that it mimics this, but even to a greater extent, we can make further modifications, which makes it even more bioactive and regenerative. And so I'll just highlight, again, just some data, and I'll finish up with this, is that we are currently funded through the NIH. We've been able to demonstrate that efficacy in different models that show very good or effective repair in these large cartilage defects. And so I'll just summarize that really these bio-inspired materials are simple, safe, and cost-effective regenerative technologies. And so you are regenerating the tissue without the use of other types of strategies like cells and things like that. We can use these materials, readily available materials that can be maintained at room temperature to also achieve a similar effect. And so what's key here is early diagnosis and using these preventative treatments to halt the progression of these osteoarthritis. And I'll finish up there. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to introduce the next panelist, both a friend and colleague, Dr. Heinrich, Vice Chair and CEO of Foundation Venture Capital Group, New Jersey Health Foundation. George.
Thank you. Thanks, Ray. This is a terrific event. I know we're under time, but I do need to compliment Dr. Darwin to putting everybody together. It's really meaningful and inspiring. And Dr. Darwin's comments initially about the global healthcare challenges, and particularly the ability to pay for care, is fundamentally critical as we look at advancement. And Dr. Pettigrew and his panel gave some really good perspectives, which I found helpful. And working with Dr. Panettiere has been a pleasure, and what he's done with NJIT brings up something, a word that I think we need to use more in these kinds of sessions, and that's collaboration. Dr. Panettiere's efforts with NJIT puts together 3 universities that are collaborating strongly together, and the talent in each one is incredible. And as we leverage that, I think we will really make a difference as we go forward. Certainly, we need to look at the socioeconomic status of everybody, but at Foundation for Health Advancement, New Jersey Health Foundation, we're looking to affect the global health system by starting locally. And that's been mentioned before. We have to start someplace. It doesn't work trying to do everything all at once. So what we're trying to do is really build the ecosystem locally as we go on. We can go to the next slide. Our mission and goal, I can say it easier than all these words. We're at the really pre-seed end of the spectrum. We're very fortunate. We're not-for-profit. We're not driven by the traditional VC, how much you're going to earn today and tomorrow and the next day, and it better be more. We have the real privilege to look at making a difference. So going into this pre-seed, as many pre's you want to put into it, we're looking at faculty at our member institutions where they have probably no proof of concept. Likely the project may or may not succeed, but if it does, it's going to make a huge change in healthcare delivery. It will empower many changes, and that kind of impact investing, looking at people who have ideas, training them. To some scientists, unfortunately, entrepreneurship is still a dirty word, and we need to help to move forward. If we go to the next slide, we have several organizations, our parent Foundation for Health Advancement, New Jersey Health Foundation, which helps fund real early research, our venture capital, Foundation Venture Capital Group, which starts the company, and we added Health Start because we're now looking at not only faculty, but actually students in our ecosystem where we can help them build ideas in companies. And that's been a great, it's all fun, but that's been wonderful. If we look at the next slide, we have to define where we are and what's important. So if we start with each person and we look at the needs that there are and the other factors that go into wellness, we are looking at adding in all those places. That inures to the community, and separately, we need a healthy planet. So the community is everybody in the world, but the planet needs to be sustained as well. So we're looking at projects across the continuum to be able to make a difference and help stimulate. What we do is we take an idea with a faculty leader or now a student leader, and we provide resources. We work with them. We'll help them launch a company. We'll do everything. We provide funding. But more importantly than our funding is our leadership, and we get ingrained in each organization that we start, and we help them. And sometimes, as I get around to founders, we try to protect founders from themselves. So we bring in some of the business stability, future planning, analyses that are important that sometimes may not be on the radar with some real basic scientists. So it's been a great collaboration, and I can't use collaboration enough because of its importance. If we look at the next slide, these are our current affiliate partners, Rutgers, Rowan, Princeton, NJIT, Stevens, and Kessler. And the types of projects are different. And what we've been able to do is actually put resources together across the university. We follow the lead of Dr. Panettiere because that leveraged the knowledge and ability. And on the last slide, the next slide, just some of our companies that we have launched at the different universities. You'll see we've done most at Rutgers to date, and several of our companies have been acquired, licensed, and some of the others that are listed here are in the process of some kind of transaction as well. So I just wanted to take a few minutes to share the importance of starting locally, the importance of giving guidance to the individual faculty, and working from a perspective that we just need to start very locally, help the resources build, the structure build, and we can grow very quickly. And it's exciting. We have lots of fun. That has to be part of the equation. And working with so many great people really invigorates everything that we do. So that's my last slide, and I will turn it back to you, Dr. Panettiere.
Great. I want to really thank the panelists for a superb job, also staying on time the best we could. And back to Professor Dewan.
Thank you so very much, all the panelists. I'm very, very grateful for your time today in bringing this particular topic, very important one for the society, into the discussion forum and looking at different aspects, what we need to address not only the global healthcare challenges, but also locally with respect to the implementation of the potential solutions into our communities. So going back to summarizing and the workshop today, we talked about the sustainable societies. And when we talk about the sustainable societies, the healthcare is a very, very critical part of sustaining our societies. With that particular perspective, we know now that how the healthcare disruptions can cause an instability and in the sustainable functions of the society. And those functions, whether they are just individual health or they are the issues related to the economic health, because we saw during the COVID pandemic, from lockdown to the restricted functions, how every sector of the society was impacted and disrupted. So bringing those technology innovations through the research, such as mRNA technology or cell and gene therapy or the new precision health or the precision medicine tools that can be brought from global to local levels, and to specifically reaching out to the socioeconomically challenged communities, because as we saw from different slides and different conversations today, that the societal aspect into the underprivileged or under-resourced environment is a very, very important aspect if any attempt has to be made in terms of providing the global healthcare or the local healthcare implementation for sustainable societies. So this is very critical, that the infrastructure and the resources are developed along with the communication and educational and the governance and the policies issues, so that those healthcare innovations can be implemented and they can benefit the individuals in the society. So we also learned today that it is very important to collaborate and bring all the partners early. Dr. Pettigrew pointed out about the critical challenge that all the 3 academies are addressing today is engineer better medicine, but that is, only possible when all the stakeholders and collaborative efforts are brought together early. We also had the panelists talked about that it is very important to establish funding. The technology and the innovation for its use has to be paid by someone. So those financial models and the funding models are very, very critical, not only for the development and the translation, but also for the use in the society. So the payer acceptance, user acceptance, and the provider's acceptance, all those 3 acceptance that I showed in one of the slide in early introduction today are very, very critical. So for that particular aspect, I'm very, very grateful to NJIT's leadership for bringing the opportunities and the funding for encouraging our collaborative efforts in order to pursue the translational science and engineering and medicine. I am also very grateful to New Jersey Health Foundation and the venture capitalist group that are looking into that particular translation in the early as well as the advanced stage, so that they can be funded through the models and then brought further. I am also grateful for the NIH leadership and Steve Shaster Summit Coordinating Center leadership that has clearly shown a big difference into the models that are competitive, collaborative, and translational, in order to make sure that only collaboration and the partnership from all the sectors, along with the infrastructure resources and the policies and the governors with the proper communication, can lead us to address the global and the local needs in the healthcare, in the aging societies, and for developing sustainable societies. So I would bring this workshop to closure at this particular point, and I thank you all for joining us today. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you again for all the panelists and the speakers. And if you have any questions for the speakers, please send them to me, and I would make sure that I will connect you with the right individual and our leadership members. Thank you. We have a lunch break now, so I invite you to join us for the lunch and networking session. And after that, the second session of the NJIT Research Institute Centers and the Laboratories Showcase continues for 1 to 2. Please, the collaboration starts from here. So we have some information for you from these PowerPoint poster presentations that are running on the monitors on the table. Let's have a very productive lunch and networking session. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.